many people confuse values with social ideologies.
Yeah.
How do you, with the people that you work with, help to crystallize what they truly value versus the social contracts that they think they should just follow? What's the difference there?
Well, I always establish core values with everybody that I work with right off the bat. First of all, I identify what is your dream? What is it that you are willing to live for? And you know what your values are because they're what you're willing to die for. So for me, in my system, I say first, what is your dream? What are you willing to learn, to grow, to become, and to change for? Because if you don't have that, you don't have an attractor factor. You don't have something to pull you out of your fear or out of your habit patterns. So first, you got to have a clear dream, goal, or objective that inspires you to stay focused and to become. And then, my four doctors are Dr. Happiness, Dr. Diet, Dr. Quiet, and Dr. Movement. So Dr. Happiness being the chief of all the doctors, because if you're not happy about your life and who you are and what you're living for, then there's no point having values because you don't have meaning in your life. So your dream and your goals are an expression of what's meaningful to you. So the first thing you got to do is establish what's happy making for me and what am I willing to do each day to make sure I practice creating happiness in my life so that I don't forget how to do it. Then I have to have values around how much movement do I need and what type of movement do I need to at least be a healthy person. Then I have to have values around diet and what the quality of food I'm going to eat is and how I'm going to have a relationship with my body so I know what it needs instead of following diets written by somebody else, which has never worked. And you got to have values around rest and introspection, because if you don't get enough sleep, then you're making yourself a medical statistic. And if you don't have some kind of introspection time to be with yourself, in yourself, and have a relationship with yourself, then you externalize yourself into the surroundings and you identify yourself by what you're doing or not doing, or how much money you're making or not making, or what your friends think about you on Facebook or don't think about you. So when you externalize yourself, then you put yourself in the position of a child, and you have to have external validation, like a child needs its parents to say, good job, or good boy, or good girl, or I love you. So if you don't have a dream, clear values on what's happy making, and a commitment to doing that, values around food and hydration, and values around exercise and breathing and movement, and values around rest and introspection or some form of spiritual practice, then, think of a tent. It's got four corners. If a wind blows one of them out, then that becomes a sail that tears the rest of them out. Mm-hmm. You can't reduce a living philosophy below happiness, diet, quiet, and movement and still be a stable, centered individual. It's impossible. You, for example, can be doing things that are happy making. You can be moving your body and eating well, but not getting enough sleep, and you'll destroy yourself. No matter which way you go, if you don't have those four corners, and the square symbolically represents the earth plane and stability and completion, number 4 is the number of completion or wholeness, then you're just making yourself susceptible to, the winds of society, and most people in society are lost. So, if you become average, then you suffer the life of an average person.
I'm hearing a lot to unpack there. One of the things that on this show I push up against is the fact that, well, people are just undisciplined, weak, and lazy. I dispute that. I don't think that's the issue. And what I hear you saying shows up in my mind as the difference between in order to and in service of. So let's say somebody starts on a quote unquote diet plan in order to get some outcome in the future outside of themselves. Well, there's a lot of sacrifices they need to make for an outcome that may or may not be fulfilling. But what I think I hear you saying is when you get resonant and clear and in touch with your values, things such as diet and sleep don't show up as in order to, but rather in service of that thing that makes you you, that you express out into the world.
Well, you see, stated another way, those are ways of being. Mm-hmm. And being is a prerequisite to becoming. So if people project things in front of them, that's what they're projecting. That's called what I call futurizing yourself. If you're looking into the rearview mirror and you're stuck in the past, you're pasteurizing yourself. And by definition, something that's pasteurized has no enzymatic activity and is dead and will poison your body. So the being is being in the present. There's three qualities of the soul: abiding, which is consciousness being present within you; representing, representing yourself in each moment; and reflecting. So if you're not anchored in being, then you're not abiding. So then your consciousness is scattered. You're like a kaleidoscope of moving images that you can never objectify because they don't have any stability to them, which is like someone who schizophrenically keeps staring at their iPhone all day and surfing social media and looking at all the bad news everybody's vomiting out. But if you have your tent staked down, metaphorically, and you're being, because you are in the joy of living and the celebration of life, from that place, then becoming is a natural thing. Just like a tree that has roots is always becoming an expression of life and reaching toward the sun. And reaching toward the sun is a metaphor for becoming its treeness. And so spirituality is really the practice of becoming whole as a human being and realizing that you are the earth, you are the moon, you are the sun, you are the stars, because you couldn't be here without all of it. And so if you forget that you are the earth, the sun, the moon, the stars, the rivers, the ocean, the rain, the wind, then you just become a bunch of ideas. And most of those ideas are part of belief systems, and belief systems are dangerous, because once you believe anything, you stop questioning yourself and you stop growing because you think you know. And then when reality shifts and your belief system won't bend for it, you break.
You become a collection of ideas.
You become a collection of ideas, but if those ideas are part of a belief system, by definition, a belief system is a closed set of ideas. Because if a belief system isn't closed, then you cannot identify the belief system. So, for example, how much Taoism or Buddhism can you put into the Bible before nobody knows if it's Christianity anymore? So basically, all belief systems are closed, but belief systems are dangerous because they keep you unconscious, because you think you know, just like you know how to tie a shoe. So you don't wander around thinking, is there a new way I can tie my shoe that's even more cool? You just say, I know how to tie my shoe. You stop thinking about it. But when you stop thinking about the mystery of life and the magic of love and relationships and the joy of becoming more of what you can be, then you lose meaning in life. And then you basically feed off the fear and the insecurities and negative energy, because that's the food that reflects your state of being.
See, that so resonates with me. Staying in the question rather than being completely attached to, and in some cases, many cases actually, defined by the answer. I'm agnostic in just about everything. It's just the way my mind is wired. It seems to me that the loop we get caught in is we're not in a state of being, so we fall prey to distraction.
Well, the ego's not, the soul always is.
Talk about that.
Well, only God can give a soul. So whatever a person thinks God is, you can call it source. You could call it pure potential if you're a science mind. You know, I'll give you an example. I interviewed Walt Thornhill, the chief scientist for the electric universe, which is the philosophy that the universe is an electric being. Everything's an electromagnetic expression. But I said to him, you know, an electric circuit has to have a source of potential. You're talking about gigatrillions of volts moving through plasma circuits and creating stars. But where's that energy coming from? And he looked at me with a blank stare and said, nobody knows. I said, isn't that interesting? So you have a whole philosophy built on an empty signifier. the point being is you can't have a physical universe without a source from which the energy and the information emerges in order to create it. That's why we have archetypes, primal patterns. You know, all things spherical are an expression of the archetype of the sphere. All things square are expressions of the archetype of the square. So you got the Platonic solids, for example. So we know that archetypes are the root language of consciousness because we can't make heads or tails of anything without these archetypal patterns, which are like the language, the alphabet of a language. So the point is there has to be a form of organization. Matter cannot organize itself. So there's something behind matter organizing it. You can stand next to a pile of rocks for 1 trillion years waiting for a Rolex watch to jump out, and it'll never happen. But if somebody who has an organizing intelligence says we can smelt the rocks, we can make some molds, we can cut some gears, we can do this, we can do this, a rock comes out, but it comes out because there's an organizing intelligence. So what if you want to call that God, or if you want to call that source or pure potential, to me, that's whatever has the power to create 100 trillion cells working in harmony called a human body, and then nature, and then a universe, is something worth directing your attention to when you're lost or scared, because that is what has the intelligence to create all life itself. And since it's been doing this forever, it's probably got a pretty good library of intelligence that you can draw on. And that's why it's important to get still each day, empty your mind and open your heart, and be receptive to intuitive insight and intuitive guidance. And if you have a legitimate question, post that question to whatever your highest source is, or whatever that entelechy is, or that guiding force, and empty yourself to receive. But if your head's moving, the mind's like a garbage disposal. It chops everything up. So even though source is trying to give you the answers to your deepest questions, you keep chopping them up with all that monkey-mindedness. So it doesn't matter what you call it. All you got to do is sit still and keep asking questions. How did I get here? How did all this get here? Who am I? What am I? Why am I here? Because if you don't really look at those questions, then you're always dealing with ephemeral things. You're dealing with phenomenal things, and you can fall into the trap of believing almost anything somebody tells you that makes you feel good for a few minutes.
So our beliefs give us a sense of certainty. They cut us off from thinking and from questioning.
Yeah.
What are the archetypes within our world that may not give us definitive answers, but they help us navigate through our questions? Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. And that's a beautiful question. And there's two answers for that. One, if you look at the hero's journey outlined by Joseph Campbell, it gives you an archetypal expression of the journey we're all on. You know, first you come into some kind of a challenge, then you got to decide, am I going to rebel, or am I going to solve this thing? Am I going to take the hero's journey? And then you're going to come to an ordeal. You've got to deal with the challenge. And then once you've accomplished the ordeal, then you have wisdom, and you realize you got to take that wisdom back to the people that are lost and scared, and you become a teacher, and that's where you stay till the next ordeal. But that's beautifully mapped out in the tarot. If you look at the major arcana of the tarot, 0, the Fool, represents the immature soul that just woke up in a human body and says, oh, wow, what's going on here? And so in simplistic form, the Fool represents the budding consciousness. It means the soul who is here to experience itself. And then the next archetype is the Magician. Well, the Magician represents the mind. And the Magician has 4 archetypal symbols on his table: a sword, which represents the air element or mind; a coin, which represents the earth element; a cup, which represents the water element and emotions. And so we got a sword for mind, a coin, and a wand, which represents the fire element, which can be the sun or metabolism, or in alchemy, celestial fire, or fire represents the source. If you look at the Kabbalistic tree, then fire is at the top, then air is the next step down in vibration, then water, then earth. So it shows you that things come from, you know, like Plasma would be a lower form of fire, but the ether would be a higher form. But then pure potential would be the invisible expression of fire in the archetypal realm. So you've got the magician, which means these are the 4 functions of mind. The fool then becomes number 1 with a mind. Then the fool can't enter the world without a mother. That's the soul is the high priestess. Then number 3 is the empress. That's the mother. Number 4 is the father, the emperor. 5 is the hierophant, the teacher. 6 is the lovers. Consciousness can't exist without polarity, and love is the vehicle to higher consciousness. 7 is the chariot, which means you're on a journey. Pay attention to where you're going or you're going to get lost. 8 is strength, which means learning to rise above the ego to get guidance from the higher self. 9 is the hermit, which means you're never going to understand life unless you take time to practice what it is you're learning, or you'll just have a collection of ideas and never know if they're true. 10 is the wheel of fortune, which means life is always mirroring you. Whatever your beliefs and thoughts are will manifest around you as your reality, because you can't see anything but what you've become. You don't see reality as it is, you see it as you are. 11 is justice, which is a judge, a female judge with a set of scales in one hand and a sword in another, which means we all have to be aware of what we've got to cut out to keep ourselves in balance, or we will do injustice to ourselves or others. 12 is the hanged man, which means I've either hung myself up by not paying attention to what I'm creating with the powers of my mind, or I'm hanging out because I'm enjoying myself. 13 is death. We all have to face death. 14 is temperance. We all have to learn to be careful about reacting when we should be responding intelligently. 15 is the devil, which represents how are you binding yourself and decreasing your own freedom through your thoughts, words, and deeds in relationship to self or other. 16 is the tower, which means if your ego's in charge and you're not paying attention, you will start damaging relationships around you, and you will throw your friends and your family members out of the tower. And it also represents flashes of insight, being open to insight and intuitive guidance and spiritual guidance. 17 is the star, which means now that you've come this far in your journey, you have to learn to balance the conscious and the unconscious to maintain your level of awareness, or you will fall back into the tower and be ego driven. 18 is the moon, which means you always have to look inside yourself to assess your own narrative and to see if your narrative is actually keeping you in a state of connection and openness and honesty and loving relationship, or if your narrative is actually creating the world that you don't want to live in, and you keep blaming it on everybody else, which leads to anxiety and depression. 19 is the sun, which means you're becoming more and more aware of the truth of yourself. 20 is judgment, which means once you've realized that you can never know the whole truth, that you always have to remain open-minded, and you can look at everybody that's younger than you and see that they're making the same mistakes you made. You can have empathy and compassion for them. You can see yourself in everybody along your journey. You can see yourself as a 10-year-old. You can see yourself as a teenager getting in trouble, having sex with people you shouldn't have had sex with, stealing cars, doing whatever. So judgment means you realize that you're looking at yourself at some stage of development all around you. 21's the world, which means congratulations, you've figured it out. And the world has a woman in a Vesica Pisces, which represents the womb of the divine. It means once you've come to understand the truth of why we're here in material form, which is to realize who and what we are, which is God realizing itself, then you are no longer bound by material existence, and wealth, power, fame, and the inappropriate use of love are no longer binding for you, because you have reached a level of understanding where you know that attachment to temporary things ultimately doesn't create freedom. You can enjoy them, but ultimately, as Jesus says in the Bible, a rich man can no sooner get to heaven than a camel can get through the eye of a needle, which means all you can take with you when you leave is what you've become. And fixed ideas and belief systems and fear and judgment And all the things that the tarot archetypes tell you to be conscious of are actually binding factors.
Okay, aside from the moments when my mind has been completely blown, thank you for that. That was brilliant. I kept pulling myself back into the conversation. And when my mind drifted, I was like, okay, where's it going? And it was something you said. So when you read Campbell's meta myth, when the hero comes home, that redemption, you talked about it early in this whole description you went through. The hero doesn't go back to their apartment and buy a bigger TV and just hang out and
No.
chill. They, whatever they get, whether that is wisdom or resources, they bring it back and contribute it to the people within their circle of influence, their reference group. And
Yes.
as you're going through all of these levels, what I keep thinking about is connectivity.
Mm-hmm.
When someone's so disconnected, they don't even realize where that disconnection was forged. What would be a very first step in reestablishing the intersection of you and me?
Well, I think before you establish the intersection of you and me, you've got to establish the intersection of self. And so the challenge is that the illusion of self easily leads you to a sense of separation. But if you pay attention to the fact that every breath you're breathing, somebody else before you already breathed, and it's coming from the whole world. The atmosphere is global. You know, we're breathing the exhalation of people in China yesterday. So we're taking on average about 25,900 breaths a day, and they all come into us with vital life force energy from outside of us. So we couldn't be alive without the whole atmosphere. So that we must be one with the atmosphere. We're bringing fluids into our body. They come from all over the place. The hydrological cycle includes every ocean, every river, and every stream. We're eating food that comes from outside of ourselves. So we're not alone because we got animals and plants inside of us all the time. And we're standing on the earth, and our body is made of the earth. So when you actually say, what is it that gives me this sense of self? It's everything in the world. So the only reason a person feels isolated is because they actually don't pay attention to what they really are, which is a really like a water fountain. If you get away from a water fountain by about 100 feet, it can look like a tree of ice that's standing there. And you can think, oh, look, there's a sculpture over there. But as you get closer and closer, you realize it's moving. So it's constantly changing. You're changing with every thought, with every breath, with every emotion. But what's sustaining you is everything around you, which Jung called the self with a capital S. And the capital SELF is what supports and sustains the little SELF. But if you identify yourself only with the little SELF, then you're caught in the domain of the ego, which is really just all the beliefs that you've taken on from other people, which means you're never really in your own creativity or in your own authenticity. You're just a photocopy machine for everybody else's beliefs, and most of which didn't work for them either. So the first thing you got to do is establish connection to yourself. And then you got to realize that love cannot really function without relationship. So if you want to have more love, then you got to give love. So I define love as the flow of energy and information through empathic and compassionate connection to self and or other. I also define love as consciousness becoming aware of itself. So you see, right now, you and I are sharing energy and information. We're having empathy and compassion for each other, and we're connecting to self and other. And without that, there is no meaning to life, and there's no relationship to life. There's only the isolation of the self, which leads to a lot of fear.
What did you mean when you said beliefs that don't work, that didn't work for them either? So people pass on beliefs to us that haven't worked for them.
Sure. How many books about diet are written by people that are having a hard time managing their body weight, their body shape, etc.? How many doctors are not healthy but are telling you what you have to do? How many people are unenlightened but are teaching Sunday school and don't know what they're talking about and couldn't understand the Bible if it exploded inside of their head? How many people tell you how to exercise but don't actually know how to exercise? How many books are written by people that have authentic expertise versus people that are just desperately needing attention? How many teachers are actually got any real authentic experience or mastery at what they're teaching versus just regurgitating a syllabus written by somebody else? So what I'm saying is that the ego is a collection of ideas that are passed on to you by your parents, your teachers, and society. And if you look at the health and well-being of most teachers, parents, and people in society, it's just like COVID. So if you want to grow, then you always have to challenge your own ideas. If a belief system's worth living, then it better be worth challenging. So what I'm simply saying is you have to question your own beliefs, because your life is mirroring what happens when you live them. And if you don't like what you're creating, then look carefully at what you're creating unconsciously, and belief systems become unconscious because there's no need to keep something conscious if you think you know what's going on.
There's just a couple of things that are grabbing me. So people are passing on. It's like, how do I unpack this? So you have not just people, but a collection of people in society that do not have beliefs, but for the most part, beliefs have them.
Right. That's most people. That's called religion.
and I recognize myself in that. You know, that's something where you're saying that, I'm going, okay, there are so many instances in my life where that is absolutely true. And you're saying that someone who is relegated to the small self, one of the problems is that produces fear. Is fear the root of these propagation of beliefs that haven't shown deep, meaningful efficacy?
Usually because when somebody's in a state of fear, but they don't have a relationship with their soul or the consciousness within them, only God can give a soul. Only God can create a universe. Whatever you want to call God, call it source. Whatever name you want to put on it. But if you're in a state of fear, as Zig Ziglar taught, 40 years ago, fear means largely false evidence appearing real. So if you don't take the time, here's an example, Robert. How many times you've been afraid about something that really made you nervous, even changed your behaviors, your beliefs, the way you spend money, who you hang out with, how you live, how you digest, how you sleep?
Are you talking about in the past 24 hours or in life in general?
Well, let me finish. How many times you've been in a state of fear, and a day, a week, a month, or a year, you look back and you realized it never happened. And I don't know why I was so afraid. It was just an idea that people were throwing around. The world's going to come to an end. We're all going to get a virus and die, or they're going to make me take a vaccination or whatever. And the list just goes on and on. But the point is, if you really honestly analyze how many times you've been afraid enough to be uncomfortable, and then say, in my lifetime, how many times I've been afraid enough to be uncomfortable, but realized later that there was nothing to be afraid of, and I was just acting out my programming and emulating people around me because I didn't have a deep enough relationship with whatever created me to hold still and ask that part of myself if there's anything to be afraid of, and if there is, what should I do about it?
That's been a repetitive pattern, a pattern that I've tried to minimize and be aware of it and reflective upon it. But it is a pattern that does repeat.
Well, I think it to some degree it does for everybody. Otherwise, spirituality would be something you do for one day and it would be over. But you see, because as Buddha said, the only universal law is impermanence, the ego paradoxically wants to create the illusion of permanence and the illusion that it can control things and the illusion that nothing's going to change. So fear largely rises up when the ego's perception of controllability and sustainability is challenged by the reality of the fact that impermanence is the law For example, you're turning over 2 million red blood cells every second. You're turning your skin cells over every 3 days, your bone cells over 3 to 4 weeks. Every cell in your body is replaced every year. So the guy that looks himself in the mirror today is not the same guy that was there 2 minutes ago or 2 days ago. But the ego gives you this illusion that it is. So if you don't embrace the reality that storms come and go, that earthquakes come and go, that wars come and go, that relationships come and go, but behind it is a witness. Everything that moves has an invisible center. If you orient yourself toward the invisible center, then you can use your awareness to view the changes from a state of calm and a state of open-minded perception. And you can then look for the pattern and say, look, here's a pattern. Every time an election comes, people get all wigged out and nervous. Every time my favorite sports team is getting its ass kicked, I throw temper tantrums. Every time somebody says a certain word to me, I get irritated. Every time my spouse doesn't do what I want them to, I get irritated. And the next thing you know, we're sleeping with our backs to each other. So if you don't find that invisible center, which is what is abiding in you, which is consciousness itself, then you are actually externalized into the phenomenality of the perpetual change, which challenges your belief system at every level, because if it didn't, you would never grow. You would be like a gingerbread man. It'll still be laying on the shelf 40 years from now and it won't have changed. And because the function of the universe is so that consciousness can experience itself, and that's why time is so important, because time guarantees change. Birth follows life, becomes death. And every moment becomes another moment. So every moment dies to the next moment. So if we don't find an invisible center that sits out of time, it's not in the past and it's not in the future, it's in the position of witnessing from the eternal now, then we get caught in the past, which is what our ego is made out of, yesterday's ideas, or we futurize ourselves, which we project our fears forward, and that doesn't look good. So anxiety is afraid that today will be tomorrow. Depression is the fear that yesterday will be tomorrow. And so when you realize that you're the one that's pre-framing the experience with the projection of what you haven't looked at, because when you find that invisible center and you actually look at it, you might start laughing at yourself, actually.
I do that quite often already. I just want to go back to the original question, because this is interesting, where I said,
who am I?
No, because this is coming full circle, because I had another conversation around resilience with a friend of mine. He was talking about, well, resilience is really about, on a physiological, psychological level, it's about adaptability.
Mm-hmm.
But you can't talk about adaptability without also addressing what's come up in this conversation throughout the entire thread. What blocks that? What cuts us off? I think the word is access. It's kind of like, well, how do I get down the road? Well, I can give you directions, but if your car has the emergency brake on, those directions aren't going to serve you very well.
Fear of change. That's the ego. Because change produces uncertainty. People lock their doors because they want to make sure nobody walks in the door that they aren't certain that they want in their house. Mm-hmm. So if somebody walks through your door and you shoot them before you realize it was Jesus, then you've responded out of fear instead of saying, who is this interesting guest in my house? So the point that I'm making is, resiliency is a willingness to take care of yourself so that you can adapt to circumstances effectively, and you have the vitality to embrace the process of change. But if you don't have the energy, the vitality, and the open-mindedness to accept that uncertainty and impermanence are more the truth then your belief system, then you're always going to have fear because you aren't ready to deal with the fact that growth requires change, that tomorrow brings change. So if a person cannot embrace uncertainty, vulnerability, and change, then they're always afraid of anything that challenges the status quo, even when the status quo is uncomfortable and they've become comfortable being uncomfortable.
And there was one word you said in that: vitality.
Yeah.
It seems exhausting to spend your life desperately trying to avoid the unavoidable.
People do it all the time.
And you hear, I just feel like I'm dragging myself through life. I have brain fog. I'm not thinking as clear as I used to. I just feel unplugged.
That's why people take so many pills. That's why everybody's looking for the magic bullet. They want the pill that'll take their fat away. They want the pill that'll make their dick stand up. They want the pill that'll make them smarter. I mean, this is where biohacking comes from. People are always trying to take shortcuts, but they don't realize that you can't take shortcuts with reality. The reality of it is you got a body, you got to take care of it, you got to love it, you got a soul, you got to have a relationship with it. If you don't look for meaning, then you won't have meaning. If you don't have meaning, then there's no reason to do anything. Right?
So as we come to the end of this fascinating, I think that's an understatement, but fascinating conversation, what are some daily practices that anyone can use to reestablish a sense of vitality over the long haul if they make it a life practice?
I think one of the most important ones is just to spend time each morning beginning your day with gratitude for what you have. Really just be thankful that you're able to breathe. Be thankful that you have an opportunity to share love and that you have warmth, shelter, friends, people that love you, people that you can share love with, food, water, that your core needs are met, that you have an opportunity to explore the mysteries that are hiding behind it all. Have gratitude for all the people that taught you things that made your life easier, better, and made you wiser. Have gratitude for the painful lessons that you've learned because they made you wiser. I think if we anchor ourselves in gratitude, then we start to really focus on the blessings and the beauty of life instead of the fear and what we don't want, because we realize how much we do have. So I think that is probably one of the most important things. I think another thing for people that don't like to do meditation because they have a hard time holding their mind still is to simply do a slow walking meditation where you go out and you say, okay, I'm going to do a slow walk for 20 minutes. You just walk nice and slow and time your breaths to your steps. So you might inhale for 3 steps, pause 1 step as you pause between inhalation and exhalation, exhale for 3 steps, pause for the next step. And so you time your breathing to your movement, and it starts to harmonize your conscious mind, your brain, your heart, and your peristalsis. And you have this balanced integration of all the biological oscillators in your body, the rhythm generators. And when they come online and they start to harmonize, which can easily happen within 20 minutes of just emptying yourself, and then you can practice listening to sounds in the environment through your right ear, which activates your left brain. And then a minute later, switch to your left ear, focus on your left ear, that activates your right brain. So you're walking, you're breathing, you're doing it in rhythm, and you're just switching from right ear listening to left ear listening. That integrates the 2 halves of the brain. Then you have the benefit of perceiving wholeness, yet also being able to put your experience into a narrative that says, I'm safe, I'm whole, I'm breathing fresh air, I'm doing something for myself, I've got gratitude for my life. And I don't think that giving people more technical, fancy techniques is helpful than that, because until you have that, then nobody's going to have the discipline or the motive or the drive or the understanding of why more advanced techniques are helpful.
Wow. So gratitude, love, curiosity, connection. Paul, I could sit here and talk to you for hours. I mean, we have many times. I'm grateful for you.
Thank you.
Thank
I'm
you for
grateful for you.
this.
Thanks for sharing and giving me a chance to share what's real for me. I mean, you know, I've been on the planet for 61 years, so I've had some time to screw some shit up and figure some things out. And you know, my life of exploration and honest commitment to answering the big questions has produced what I just shared with you as not only how I live, but what I use to help countless thousands of people find meaning and value in life, and orient their compass towards their own chosen North Star.
And man, I would love to have you back again in the future.
Well, let's do it.